What's good, family? I'm Nikisha Elise Williams, the host of Black and Published podcast and the author of the novel The Seven Daughters of Dupree. This historical fiction novel is about the secrets kept between mothers and daughters over the course of 7 generations and is told backwards in time from 1995 to 1860. I have an excerpt from the novel for you today. The audiobook is narrated by Bonnie Turpin, and this scene you're about to listen to is from Chapter 1, where the character, Tatiana, affectionately known as Tati, writes a poem to her father.
Dear Daddy, I'm 14 now. Legs brown, same for my hair and eyes. Mimi say she worried 'cause my hips round. It don't matter, ain't no boys calling. Phone don't ring, my line don't sing. I just pose in the mirror. Mama say I'm looking for the wrong kind of attention, but I just be looking at the symmetry of my face, trying to see yours, but hers I can't erase. Oh, I forgot to mention, I think I want to pierce my nose, but Mama would have a fit, I suppose. And I can't do something drastic like that, can't alter my appearance until you get back. Or until we meet, at least. I just wanted to let you know what to be on the lookout for. Your little girl, maybe a bit bigger. Chocolate, like you, I think. When Mama's drunk, she cuss me and say I got your mahogany brown. Just thought you'd want to know what I look like now. Love, Tati. March 26th, 1995. P.S. Today's my birthday.
I hope you enjoyed that scene from The Seven Daughters of Dupree, narrated by Bonnie Turpin. The novel is available everywhere books are sold and in whatever format you prefer: hardcover, ebook, audiobook, and large print. So, if you can, please consider getting a copy of The Seven Daughters of Dupree today. Now, let's get to the episode.
It takes a whole lot of discipline just to notice the thing in front of you. And we notice the things in our head, but that's not necessarily the thing that's in front of us. And as a writer, early on, I was incapable of noticing the thing that was in front of me.
What's good? I'm Nikisha Elise Williams, and this is Black and Published on the Mahogany Books Podcast Network, bringing you the journeys of writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. Happy National Poetry Month. April is also recognized as Second Chance or Fair Chance Month for people working in abolitionist movement spaces. And today's guest, Reginald Dwayne Betts, occupies both titles as a poet and activist. He's here today to discuss his new poetry collection, Doggerel, which he says is his most joyous to date.
What has been challenging is the realization that, you gotta win joy. It's hard fought, yo. You gotta prove that you're joyous. I could wake up tomorrow and talk about how bad the world is and ain't nobody gonna disagree with me. But let me tell somebody I'm in love, they gonna be like, for real?
Dwayne is 6 books deep in his literary career, but says Doggerel is his first book that's solely about him. How he became intentional about singing a different song after realizing he'd become a long-suffering Black man. Plus, why he believes identity is always in flux. And why he said he's never had a problem reading his work in prisons until he started writing about love. That and more is next when Black and Published continues. Dwayne, when did you know that you were a writer?
Yeah, it was a choice. I've actually taken to telling people this more now because I realized how important that choice was. I had gotten arrested, confessed to carjacking a man, and pled guilty. And during none of this period had I thought about being a writer. I was thinking about going home. I hadn't thought about being a prisoner either. And then I was sentenced to 9 years in prison. And I go to the holding cell.
On a
And
first
I could think of,
offense?
yeah, it was carjacking with a gun. In my own life, I have come to recognize that one of the things about accountability is acknowledging the gravity of a thing that was committed and then acknowledging the inability of a system to grapple with the person that committed that crime. And so I was 16 years old, and it was during a time period when they were talking about super predators. And the one thing that the Democrats and the Republicans agreed on was that, young people needed to be locked up for a longer period of time for acts of violence that have been happening. But this is also what the source felt like. This is also what Vibe felt like. If you read the coverage of these high profile crimes that occurred in 1995, 1996, you will not see people writing that young people need another chance. We weren't talking about things like criminal justice reform. I mean, we were sending children to prison. It wasn't a question about whether or not I would be sent to prison with adults. That was a given. The question was how much time would I get? And
Mm.
carjacking carries life in the state of Virginia. It carries a mandatory minimum, I think, of 20 years in the feds. So in Virginia, it carries 15 to life. But that 15, which is your minimum, the judge could suspend any or all of that. So I got sentenced to 15 years for carjacking, and I got sentenced to 5 years for robbery and 3 years for the use of a gun in the commission of a felony. So that's 23 years. The judge suspended 9 years from the carjacking. So that left me with 6. And they ran that 6 and that 5 concurrent. So I did 6 years. I did both of those sentences at the same time. And then I had 3. So I had a 9-year sentence. And I'm in a holding cell and I'm thinking to myself, what will I be when I get out of prison? Here's the silliest question of all. Like I'm sitting here, I'm 16 years old, I'm 5'5", I'm 125 pounds, and I'm asking myself, man, what are you going to be when this is all over? And I laugh at it now because I told myself I would be a writer. And the thing is, in retrospect, I recognized that I knew that I was now a convict. I had committed the crime. It was mine. I knew that I was going to be a felon, but I needed to have something else to be to keep me afloat those difficult days. And that was it. And I'm going to be a writer. From then on out, I just worked to make it happen and figure out what it meant to be that thing, even if I didn't fully know or understand.
Okay. So I'm going to take a pause right here to kind of ground this conversation that we're about to have and just give you as well as the audience a little bit of my background. So most people who listen to this podcast know I'm a writer and my background is a journalist. What some may not know is that my day-to-day job, I work for a social justice nonprofit called Narrative Initiative, where we work with small grassroots organizations about grounding their daily strat comms with generational narrative strategy. One of the groups that we work with will be considered like an abolitionist group, and that's focused on criminal justice reform and all of those things. And I say all that to say, because one of the things that we do in narrative strategy is trying to find new language and redefine certain experiences. And so with one of the organizations that we work with, we've been very intentional about not using the language of the criminal legal system that dehumanizes people, such as calling yourself a convict or a felon, but always being person first. So a formerly incarcerated person, all that type of stuff. And so I feel like we're about to have a very in-depth conversation. So I just want to ground everybody listening in that background. And before we go on.
And you should, because one of the things though, and I wrote a book called Felon, and I think like language is very important, right? And one of the reasons why I say I made a decision, I pulled a pistol out on somebody in my community and carjacked them. And so I made a decision to commit a crime, and that made me a convict. But I also think that like our identities are in flux and that our identities are not permanent. So one of the challenges I've consistently had with language like formerly incarcerated is I'm all for it. But it was Howard University that took my full tuition academic scholarship from me. And so sometimes I'm asking myself, when is the use of language preventing us from having a conversation that we needed to have? And what you asked me was, when did I become a writer? So what's interesting is for me to become a writer, I had to hold on to who I was when I picked up that pistol. And I had to say, I'm not going to be that though. This is not my identity. I knew that for the rest of my life, I was going to, in some ways, be judged by the crime that I committed. But by saying that I am going to be a writer, that is the identity that I walk into a room with. I try not to walk into a room at all with the fact that I committed a crime, because I don't think the fact that I committed a crime makes me a criminal. I think the fact that it makes me a felon is just the definitions of the English language that we use. But I tell people consistently, when you talk about me, you could talk about me as a father, you could talk about me as a lawyer, as a poet, as a CEO, as a founder of a nonprofit. I think that it's really reductive in some ways to refer to me at all based on my incarceration. And yet I still understand the need for it. And the reason why, if you ever hear me lean into like, yo, I was a convict, I was a felon, it's because I know that the people who do the worst are the people who get dismissed the easiest. And so I want to make sure like I don't have to run from anything. I make sure that people understand that you don't have to ask me if I committed a violent crime. I committed a violent crime. What you should ask me is if I'm a violent human being. And I'll tell you that I'm not, right? And so I try to wear some of it because I can. And I deeply understand the people in the organizations who shift to a people first language because they see how discriminatory language can be. I just have set myself up to be unwittingly the role of an antagonist and that I'm not agreeing with anybody. But sometimes I feel that way because when Howard University rejected me, I had nobody to call on though. And I didn't have the Justice First language organizations that I ain't been nobody's poster child. You know, when I be like, I got mine from the ground up, I'm not trying to make myself seem bigger than I am, but I am trying to say that I have had to fight in the struggle. And because I think that some of it was unfair and unjust, I want to name all of it. I want to tell you that my mom was raped and that she was raped by a black man and that he doesn't get to just be formally incarcerated because that makes him feel better. That he gets to figure out how to be accountable for what he did. And I get to figure out how to not live in a world in which I want to inflict violence on somebody else because of how they hurt somebody in my family. So since we just grounded everything, I'm just gonna put it all out there because like because people in the audience they could be like, "Hey, ain't that dude that wrote that book called Felon?" And so we might as well be like, "Yeah, that's that. I did it. I did it as a way to say I am more than whatever that label is." Right? I wasn't trying to hold on to it as much as I was trying to draw attention to the multiple ways that we are always more than those things.
And I appreciate your ownership of all that you are, including your incarceration and how that still affects you, how that even still shows up in your work. Because even though you say this book of poems that we're about to talk about today, it's about dogs, it's also about all your dogs that you found while you were incarcerated, right?
Yeah.
So I only make that point because in owning all of who you are and making the choice while you were just getting inside to do something different and to become a writer, you have had to contend with both the limits and the expansiveness of language to define yourself for yourself. What was it about being incarcerated and in prison where you found a freedom on the page? Because as you say in the book, some of the poems in the beginning of this book are from the time when you were incarcerated.
Those images that's in the front of the book and in the back come from poems that I wrote when I was in prison. The word prisoner haunts my soul. I wrote this as a teenager in solitary confinement. It drains my existence as a man. Likewise do my living conditions. My sanity is hidden somewhere written in the code 251534. It has always been a thing that has been there. I think the wherewithal and the desire to name myself something else just came from me learning very early on the power of names. But also thinking about history. I was young, but I still was thinking about the historical trajectory that I placed myself on. I had read Man Child in the Promised Land. I had read Makes Me Want to Holler. I had read the story of Racehorse, the story of Albert Simple, which is another brother who got locked up down south. I had read these books about incarceration before I got locked up. And I understood myself to be a part of a tradition of Black men who had been in prison. And maybe that's why I thought I could be a writer too, because I knew about McCall and I read McCall. I was like, oh, well, dudes that get locked up become writers. But my thing is, my whole desire was to have some kind of control over how I showed up. And at least by saying I was a writer, it gave me something to hold on to, even if at the time I had no idea what that meant. And I didn't at the time. I was completely oblivious to what it meant to be a writer.
So then when did you find the path that would take you into what it actually is to become who you are as a writer?
I got lucky. I had a GED teacher who was by trade an English teacher. And so she had me reading a bunch of books. And, writers read, and I love to read. And so I was already doing half of the work just because I loved to read before that. And then because she was an English teacher by trade, she had me keeping a journal and she had me writing essays. And they were horrible, I mean, I was like incapable of writing a descriptive sentence to save my life. If you read my journals from then, you'd be like, yo, is he in college or is he on the moon? Like where is he? Because it takes a whole lot of discipline just to notice the thing in front of you. And we notice the things in our head, but that's not necessarily the thing that's in front of us. And as a writer, early on, I was incapable of noticing the thing that was in front of me. Fast forward, a lot of what you do is what you see other people do. And a lot of what you believe you can do is what you've seen other people who you imagine yourself to be in proximity with do. And so somebody slid this book. I say, hey, yo, send me a book. I'm in solitary confinement. They took all my books because you can't have books in a hole. I asked for a book and they slide Dudley Randall's The Black Poets under my cell door. And I'm reading this and I'm just like, whoa, Sonia Sanchez, Lucille Clifton, Robert Hayden. And then I read Etheridge Knight. And I'm like, wow, this dude is writing about prison. And what captured me is he was a narrative poet and I could tell stories and I've always liked telling stories. And so I was like, oh, I could do this. And I could tell a whole world within 15 lines. And I was like, I'm gonna be a poet. And some of these poems I wrote months after getting that book, still in the hole. Like, yeah, this is me now.
I love that. I'm gonna ask this because I'm nosy. It has nothing to do with this conversation. But like, how long were you in solitary for and what for?
Oh, it does because I became a poet in solitary. And the last poem I wrote in prison, I wrote from the hole. I wrote about a dude that was in the hole with me. It was a drug addict who had he was like really remorseful for having stolen this little girl's book to feed his habit. And he had told me the story and I turned it into a poem. You know, I was in there for different reasons. Prison is a place of many rules. And sometimes I would break the rules on purpose just because I'm tired of people telling me what to do. Which sounds so ridiculous, man. But like sometimes when you feel like all of your dignity is stripped, somebody walking past your cell door at 6 in the morning saying, stand up for count. You're like, yo, I'm up. And they like, nah, stand up. And look, they got a job to do. They want you to stand up because they want to make sure that you're safe, that you're healthy, that you ain't been hurt. But I ain't thinking about that job. I'm thinking about the fact that it's 6 o'clock in the morning, man. And I got 8 more years to do, 10 more years to do. So I'm just like, I'm up, dude. I'm not standing up. You can see me. I'm not standing up. And then that's a charge. Or like, you know, you're not supposed to put anything up in your window when you go into the bathroom and you hang something up in your window and you hang a sheet in front of yourself so your cell partner can't see you going to the bathroom. You want to create some privacy for yourself. Well, you're not supposed to do that. That's a charge. I had different kinds of charges like that. Some was like incidental contact with COs that they call assault. You know, I got 6 months in the hole for that. One time I gave somebody the finger. I got 30 days for that. I got 15 days for giving somebody the finger, 8 days for saying something else. A lot of different reasons. And ultimately, you know, what I think about it is the solitary was a way to control. And when I was young, you end up in the hole because you don't know how to comport yourself in a world that is insane.
And yet you say that you became a poet in the whole.
Yeah, because you get this poetry book and you realize that you can write a whole life in 15 lines and suddenly you start doing it. I find myself obsessing in these poems about the same thing that I still obsess about. And so when I say I became a poet, maybe part of what I think is I became somebody who was deeply engaged with the process of becoming, what it meant to become, thinking about what I needed to do to become. Yeah, at the back end, man, I'm pretty happy with how it worked out, you know, for better or for
Because
worse.
that's my question. So who have you become?
I become a man who is less ashamed to weep, a man who's not ashamed at all to weep. I've become a man who really has figured out how to build a life that is mostly in service of others. I'm a really good dad, a good friend. I'm in love with somebody. It's always cool. You know what I mean? And actually, you know what though? I think truly though, truly, all jokes aside, man, I was 17 years old, 18 years old, solitary confinement, terrified. And when I think about language too, I think part of the reason I think about language is because I'm asking myself, am I using language that makes you more likely to not be afraid of me? That like makes it more likely for you to be willing to be in community with me? And I think that's one of the reasons why I don't use certain words to describe myself. But I also know that like the reason why I was so afraid in prison is because of the fact that I was in prison. I was like the bad guy. I was the villain. I wasn't the person who you saw walking down the street and was like, let me ask him to help me. And so I think about solitary and all that stuff. And I think about me surviving it. I think about, you know, what gave me that rooting was being a writer. It was what gave me a sense of myself beyond where I was, but it was also what gave me a sense of the people around me that was able to go deeper than whatever they did to get into prison or whatever they might be doing on any given day. Becoming a poet is what gave me the grace that I needed to survive in a world that is sometimes more harrowing than it needs to be.
And so like you're now 6 books deep as a writer.
I
As
like that. 6 books deep.
it's
Yeah.
true. You 6 books deep, 5 collections and a memoir. You in this thing for real. So like and seeing and always carrying what you did in the past into who you are becoming in the future and how it shaped your present. What does the page give you, or what freedom does it provide for you in your life?
Doggerel is the most joyous book that I've ever written. But the reason is subtle. I got to go back to redaction. It says Reginald, a somewhat complicated man, prematurely set in his ways, decided at 16 to leave home, traveled many miles to get to prison and meet young men turn old flying backwards. Experience was a cold teacher, nurturing a rebelliousness that dared to wonder, dared to achieve. He left prison a couple years ago. I hear he's making out okay. You gotta understand, yo. I write that poem when I am in the darkest place that you could imagine. I'm in solitary confinement at Red Onion State Prison. Everybody around me is doing life in prison. I ain't seen nobody go home since I got locked up. I ain't seen my mama in 2 years. And the point is, when I was in prison, I knew a poem could literally be you bringing into existence something that didn't exist before. I wrote myself into doing okay, man. When I was in the middle of doing the worst that anybody could ever be doing, I still got calluses and dry skin from those years in the mountains, man. I feel like they should pay my dermatology bill. We be talking about reparations, man. I want some good lotion. No, no, I was joking.
No, you're not.
No, I'm serious. I had this whole scene with this horrible lotion that dried my skin out over the weekend. But the point is that, like, for real, I was in these mountains and it hurt my skin, hurt my soul, hurt my heart. But I wrote something about me surviving and being okay. And then I came home. You come home and then you talk about prison, and you don't realize that people start asking you for a certain song, and you don't realize that they're asking you. So since you don't know that they're asking you, you don't know that you're singing the same song.
Mm.
And you don't know that you become to embody this song filled with sorrow. That people tell you that people in prison deserve a second chance, but the way that they talk to you is as if you don't deserve one. When you look at people's communities, when you look at people's staff, it never reflects people who've been to the places that you've been or struggle with the things that you're struggling with. And so I realized, like, I was singing a kind of song that felt too often bereft, too often like not having that sliver of possibility that helps somebody get from one moment to the next. So in 2020, 2021, my friend tells me that she has colorectal cancer. And I said, I'm gonna write a poem for you every time you gotta go to chemo. Canary is the poem in there that captures it all for me. Because I ended the poem, I said, a lover once showed me how everyone deserves to be disappointed. I wrote that. And I was like, I was like, nah, I don't think that's true. I lived enough of a life to know that in my travels, I've learned that somebody did show me how everyone deserves to expect tenderness. But the first turn in the poem was to be disappointed. And it was revision that had me saying, wait a minute, though, that thing is true. But is this what my audience needs? Because you can have two competing truths, and a writer gets to make a decision about the world that they create. And writing those poems for my friend Amy was the first time that I was just like, yo, no, I got a choice, dude. I don't have to write poems that make me feel like I'm a tragic figure in somebody else's story. I ain't the hero either, but I'm not tragic.
And like you mentioned that this book is more joyful than your other ones. And I haven't read your entire backlist, so forgive me. But what I noticed in this collection is that, like you said earlier, that, you had a hard time when you were in your GED program writing a descriptive sentence about something that was right in front of you. And so much of the pieces in this book are descriptions of the things that are right in front of you. I'm thinking of the poem Peonies, for example, about just seeing the beauty come out from the ground, or all your different walks with your Jack Russell Terrier and all the dogs y'all encounter, or the dogs that you try to save from the oncoming traffic because it decided to dart out in the middle of the street.
But look, check. When I say it's the most joyous, it was like me actually falling into the world more to learn about the things that had nothing to do with the world. This notion that, like, because ultimately, I think that that poem is about the ways in which so much of who we are gets built on what we do for others and how dangerous that is. It's nothing that I could do to make anybody think I'm good. I'm not doing it for that. So part of the conceit of the entire poem is like, are you doing the needed thing in that moment? That is actually, and me trying to write that poem and write it in the way that I did, it gives me something to think about later. In a moment, it was what I felt like I needed to do. And I did it without thinking.
Since we're here and we're talking about the book, can you go ahead and read like 3 pieces?
Doggerel, the poetry collection by Reginald Dwayne Betts, is a collection of poems, oftentimes about his own dog, a Jack Russell Terrier, but also about the men he's called his dogs while he was incarcerated, the sons he's raising, as well as the love of his life, and how he relates to them and through them in what he says is his most personal work to date. Here's Dwayne.
We never say goodbye. I like this poem. I like all of them, but we never say goodbye. The silence of the night breathes, and this ain't the lonely of leaves raining onto a dark road after midnight. And so one of us digresses us to a village in a country where we've never held hands. where men transform silkworm cocoons into silk threads and the quilts, the entire process alchemic. Frayed remnants of a butterfly's past becoming the quiet, where lovers disappear at night. Shahid knows that there is no disappearing in prison. What do any of us deserve? I close my eyes, touch a tooth mark beneath my heart. Penitentiary cells nearly became my tomb. I ducked contretemps and mischance. What might I deserve? After some seasons, with this longing feeling like heroin, you breathing here and now, twice, my tears on your lips.
So can you just go ahead and read the next page, Tarragon, because that's one of my favorites. Since
Yeah.
like you started it, like we already on 42, so you just go ahead and read Tarragon on 43.
I gotta tell you, this is one of my favorite poems, and it has gotten me not in trouble, but it has been the most interesting. I had a student once who said to me, "Man, I read that poem Tarragon, and I read it to a boy." And she was like, "I wouldn't have read that one." I'm just saying, Professor, that
It was a setup. It was a bit of a setup. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tarragon. I touch teeth marks along my ribs, and my body becomes a tuning fork again, humming as if you are here. Your hands holding mine as if a man who is never safe is safe with you. This memory, this hovering, a fucking impossibility in a world of almost. You know how easily we might have missed this. Your body over mine, my breath far more controlled than the beast inside me that you call with your tongue. The scientific name for tarragon is Artemisia dranconculus, Latin for dragon goddess, and I know the way my vulnerability becomes my heart's pleasure. It's the light only a dragon gives. And now you've turned me into a flame. What will I do? Can a body whir, whistle, caterwaul? I've watched you simmer beneath me, beside me, while I lay above you, my face lost in your paradise, all your shuddering, a yesterday or tomorrow I'll barter, the off-kilter ruinous wild thing banging against your chest. You hoard treasures because some searching lasts forever. Tell me I'm the story you want to keep telling. Tell me not to move, to relax. In 11 ancient texts, Drancoculus is a symbol for healing. Your skin juxtaposed with mine is my healing. A shade before amber, some bronze, nibbles of red dirt, a wonder of grays. We are where flotsam finds home. I touch a spot along my rib cage and feel your teeth against my flesh. Hold my hands as the rattling inside me awakens and thrums. Once I chipped a tooth, running it along the concrete of a mango. Let me run my teeth along your flesh, insatiable now as then. Your river giving me this freedom.
One more, please.
All right. In the station of the metro, don't you remember? Been running, now buoyant, this heart still a cauldron. Love's truant, my voice hushed. Tell me to God the pardon. My heart still, a cauldron on a train headed for trouble. Tell me to God the pardon. This falling ain't never been subtle. On a train headed for trouble, a red ballad song on my mind. This falling ain't never been subtle. You remember our first time? A red ballad song on my mind. That night, Luther's voice. Don't you remember that one time? Running, now, buoyant.
Thank you. So earlier you mentioned that among all the things you are also in love, which I love seeing love poems written by a man. I was right. I was like, whoever this lady is, he loved her real bad. Like it's so evident. And like there are different poems that I can see where it was like, okay, this is the girl from around the way, and we had to spin the block or whatever it is. I'm like, yeah, he loved her real bad.
Yeah.
In owning that part of your own identity, was it scary for you to write these poems and sing a new song versus the ones that you had been writing about and singing in all of your other books?
I didn't even know what I was saying. And what happens is, as you write a poem,
Sir,
and you,
what you mean you didn't know what you were saying?
oh no, no, not in this poem. I know what I'm saying in
Oh,
Doggerel.
I was
No,
like,
no, no, no,
like
no,
now,
no,
sir.
no. I know exactly what I'm saying in Doggerel. That was real. When you asked me, was it hard? Now check this out. Ain't nobody ever tell me that I couldn't read none of my poems anywhere before Doggerel. I go into prison, and I'm talking about people getting stabbed, and ain't nobody say, yo, this is. What do you think? So now you get Doggerel, and I have had multiple instances where people was like, yo, that might be too much. You know what I mean? For this group, for that group. And what has been challenging is the realization that like joy,
Mm.
you gotta win joy. It's hard fought, yo. You gotta prove that you joyous. I could wake up tomorrow and talk about how bad the world is, and ain't nobody gonna disagree with me. But let me tell somebody I'm in love, they gonna be like, for real? and so and so like it's so funny too. I'll be like, yo, my girlfriend did the cover. And they'd be like, yo, you just going. I was in a prison and the dude was like, yo, you really love that woman, don't you? I was like, yeah, I do. But the thing is, man, these are two things, right? Is it was easy to write the poems. This is the first time I wrote a book that was entirely about me. And I pride myself. Somebody wrote a review of Felon in which they noted that I make a point of embodying the multitudes. This is the first book that I've embodied my multitudes. And so
Mm.
every one of these poems is about me. And I will say that some of the pressure people put on me about how to think about love poems and challenging me to come with the full, they weren't necessarily doing this, but they ended up doing this. And so when I got that poem that ends now twice, my tears on your lips, I mean, that's love. So I think what this has meant for me is a journey to get to this place where I'm thinking like more holistically, but more totally about the life that I'm living. And then the fear that comes from reading in front of audiences is that it was so much easier to be a long suffering black man. Yeah, I mean, like you know, what I mean, you get awards for it and everything. And the sad part about it is I got all of those awards too. So I will say the most beautiful thing about the turn is that the audience feels it. I had an event a couple days ago, and it was like 50 mostly middle-aged white folks, and we were laughing and having a good time. And I was reading poems. And when they left, they bought the book, and they didn't buy the book because they wanted to know more about prison. They didn't buy the book because they thought it was going to give them some good points and they could talk about having bought the book at their next thing. They bought the book because they thought it was going to be a poem in there that they wanted to share with somebody, that it was a poem in there that they wanted to read again. And that has been what I hope will happen. And that has delighted me time and time again when it has happened.
You say in the acknowledgments that reading a poem to strangers reminds you of what it means to be a poet. Why?
Because poets have to sing. Our craft is predicated on how we communicate well to an audience of people that we may never meet. But if we never talk to people, then we never allow ourselves to measure the work that we do against the moral that we want to create. And I found it really humbling because it's scary. Yo. You know, can I read you a poem? No, you can't read me no poem. What you mean? And then, you know, I mean, walk up to a brother and be like, yo, can I read your poem? Come on, man. What you mean? Can you read me a poem? And then, you know, you hit him with a joint. It's like, damn, all right, man, that was deep. You know what I mean? And it is a challenge. It is a challenge. It challenges my conceptions of intimacy.
Mm.
Reading the Black Men is actually, I think I'm gonna have to start a Reading the Black Men project because it really does challenge my comfort, how we expect to show up in each other's space. I went into this men's prison and I'm reading these love poems, and I was like, does the vulnerability make me less?
Mm.
And it doesn't. And every time you read to somebody on the street, it reminds me of what a poet is because it reminds me that the vulnerability doesn't make you less. It reminds me that people have permission to not listen to you sing, and that's okay too.
So, like, I don't know your song and dance before. So, like, you talking to me now gives all of like the song of the vulnerable Black man, the prototype vulnerable Black man that every girl says that she wants on Threads when she's complaining about these trash ass men on date naps and in the manosphere and all the things. Does that identity, as you say, you want to read to more Black men, is that one that you're trying to propagate among other Black men?
I'm happy that I get asked these kind of really thoughtful questions because it lets me ask myself, what is my role in doing this work in the world at large if anybody reads the poems? And this is a really important question because it's about how we show up for each other in relationships and in the world. I like to believe I'm a good dude, and I am a good dude, actually. And I show up in the world and I make mistakes and all of that, but I am a good human being, man. And I've tracked that for a very, very long time. And so, yes, I like to believe that reading some of these poems helps people think in really complicated ways about what it means to be vulnerable, about what it means to be opening up to grief, though, because it's not necessarily the love poems. I mean, now in some ways it is. What does it mean? I ain't cried, dude. I ain't cried, man, until 2023. And I had been out for a minute. I cried twice in prison. I prided myself on having no tears. And now I cry all of the time. I'm like a well constantly erupting. And I think that some of these poems are pushing at that and pushing it about what does it mean to be your full self, because I hadn't been my full self. But some of the poems are about giving people resources to deal with grief. I like to believe that I can, man, I got bars. This is the arrogant part of the show. I like to think that my book has a repository of these notes that give you something to think about. Like this line right here. Mostly, I wanted to be close to him in a way that my father has never been to me. How many of us have lived a life where we want to be close to somebody? The way in which you can know the person that you care about doesn't want to do X, and you still pushing to do X because you just want to be close to them. And that could be a mistake, if not for their awareness. I like to believe that the book is filled with these moments and poems that can push the brother, the sister, anybody to be better than they were. Because, the poems are better than me, to be candid. You know what I mean? The poems are oftentimes me threading the needle of 7 things that I might have noticed in a moment and didn't. The poem is me noticing how beautiful it was to have this woman kiss tears from my eyes. It wasn't me telling her. It was me thinking about it months later, like, yo, you actually love me. And you know what I mean? It's like I should have told you, I should have said that when she did the thing. The poem becomes an opportunity for me to do again what I probably should have did the first time in a lot of these moments. So I read her that poem and she's like, oh, you do care.
He cares, sis. He cares. You mentioned earlier that you are the founder of the nonprofit Freedom Reads, and in the edition you sent me the Freedom Edition. What is Freedom Reads, and what does the Freedom Edition do?
Yeah, so books come out in hardback first, and so a lot of prisons you can't get a book in hardback if it's just come out. And what I was committed to doing was making sure that people in prison could read my books, but they could read them at the same time. And so I got my publisher W.W. Norton with the publication of Felon to do a Freedom Edition that we could purchase and give away to people in prison in real time. So as I've been doing this book tour and going from universities and different places, bookstores, public libraries, I've also made it a point to go into prisons. And then going into prisons, I give them this copy. And I also have given copies to some like important people who I want to know about the work, but who I know will appreciate the backstory of the Freedom Edition in their hand, to understand that this is something that most people who touch will be serving time in prison.
Mm.
And the same way that you read the opening letter, that's what they'll read. What is Freedom Reads? Freedom Reads is sort of an extension of everything that we've been talking about. One poem that I wrote in prison that I don't have is one of the few poems that I know I wrote and I wish I had, because I said something to the fact that it doesn't matter what I do when I leave, because the people who need to see it most won't. And I was operating on this idea that I never seen in prison people who had come home from prison. My whole sentence, I never saw anybody who had come home from prison. And what Freedom Reads is, just like the Freedom Edition is, it's an opportunity to connect with people who are in prison. And it came born out of somebody saying, what would you do for people in prison if money wasn't an issue? And I was like, we put millions of people in prison. I'll put millions of books in prison.
Mm.
And then over the months, that got iterated out and it became conceptualized as the Freedom Library. 3 beautiful handmade bookcases that curve into space. They got finger joints. The details is just lovely. I designed this with some architects. And the bookcases are accessible on each side so that they stand 44 inches high. And when like 6 people stand around them, it's like standing around a coffee table. But instead of talking over breakfast, you're talking over books. And we put it in the cell block so that it's right where people sleep. If you wake up in the morning, go out of your cell, you see the Freedom Library. Somebody just called me and said, look, man, I'm standing in front of the Freedom Library. Dwayne, I can't explain to you what this means to me. And so it's real. And the way it's all connected is like when I yelled out, hey, yo, send me a book, and somebody slid me to Black Poets, that book became the foundation of the life I live now.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost feel like somebody called out to me, hey, yo, send me a book. And we put in the Freedom Libraries and all of these cell blocks as a way to answer that call. And it becomes not just a way for you to get these beautifully curated books. You got your Faulkner, your Morrison, your Baldwin, but you got Coombs, the history of science. You know what I mean? I mean, you got some dope books in there. You got, 10% of the books are Spanish. You got poetry, you got fiction, you got history. It's a really compelling collection. And it's all meant to open up worlds to people so that they can have a book do for them what it did for me, which is change the trajectory and shape the trajectory of my life.
What do you want people to know about the totality of your work, from Freedom Reads to your writing to your work as an attorney?
I'm just a man trying to stay above the clouds, as a friend of mine said in one of his poems, man. I tried to turn a real tragic failure on my part, carjacking somebody, into something that would matter for the duration. And I hope that's what people take out of my work. I try to turn a failure into something that mattered, into something that mattered independent of that first action. Doggerel is a completely different book, and it's a book that's born. How do you turn joy out of tragedy? You know what I mean? And a lot of the stuff that was going on was tragic, even though a lot of it was joyous as well. It's like, how do you turn joy into that? And it's like you look for it, and I kept looking. And I hope people realize that even in the heartbreak that is incarceration, we can find something more meaningful in it through our work and through our connection with people.
Thank you. So before I let you go for the afternoon, I want to do like a little speed round in the game. So first question, what is your favorite book?
Don Quixote.
Who is your favorite author?
John Edgar Wyman.
Who is your favorite poet?
Robert Hayden. And Lucille Clifton.
Name a poet you think people don't know enough about.
I'm gonna say Robert Hayden, just because he existed at a time period where he wasn't in the Black arts movement, but his work was richly and deeply about what it meant to be Black in America. He's written poems about Billie Holiday, Bessie Smith, Malcolm X. He's written long pieces on the Middle Passage. He's just done really deeply thought-provoking work, amazing work, and I like his style. I would say Robert Hayden. Yeah.
Who is your favorite artist? Any medium.
Anselm Kiefer. And it's because I got two of his pieces tattooed on me. I got one called The Language of Birds tattooed on my back. It's this giant stack of books. They got wings coming out the spine. And the books, though, man, the books are fragile. When you see the sculpture, it's like made out of iron and wood, and it just looks old. And the wings are huge, as if the wings are like too much for the books. And I find it beautiful because it's this question. You know that the books are powerful, but are they so powerful that they'll weigh you down? Or would it actually give the wings the gusts, to take you away? And I love his work. And I got another piece, book with wings. It's just he does a lot of things again and again. And this book with wings motif is one that he's returned to again and again. But I also like the way that he's explored the past, and he's found ways to grapple with it and been willing to do it in ways that the public might not care about it, but he does.
If money were no object, where would you go? Where would you live? And what would you do?
I live in different places in the United States. I would keep New Haven as my home spot, but I would intentionally live in different places. And I would try to be immersed in community in really real ways. I would try to meet people. I would be really good in language. I'll be fluent in at least 2 or 3 languages. And I would write, actually. I love the work I do at Freedom Reads, but it's been the work of discovery. And I think as somebody who went to prison as a kid, so much of what I've done has been predicated on a desire and a need to discover myself. And I think your question gave me a little bit of permission to think about myself outside of this moment. Most of us who have been to prison live lives, but somehow that incarceration stole the permission to dream from us in a way that was disconnected from that thing. And so your question let me dream in a way that was sort of disconnected from prison. And what I do is I would get more of what I missed by being in prison, which is a chance to experience. At least I know I still be living with people. I'd still be reading poems to people. You know what I mean? I just wouldn't have a home. I'll be going place to place every 18 months.
So let's stay there. Name 3 things on your bucket list.
To go to Alaska, to go to Japan, to translate 20 poems of mine into Spanish.
What brings you joy?
Everything. Yeah, man, everything. Being grateful for the fact that I know that I live a life that as difficult as it is sometimes, is beautiful and it's remarkable. And I'm really grateful. I've gotten people out of prison that I served time with. Literally, I got my homie out of prison and I just returned to the cell last month, literally same cell we was in, 3C21. And so, I lived a life that has been remarkably rewarding, and I've been really blessed despite all of the random things I've done to sabotage myself. And so I take joy in all of it, because these days I'm really cognizant of how it easily could have been different.
And what brings you peace?
I get to come home. I mean, I used to allow myself to be compartmentalized. I used to do it to myself, whether it was in prison or out here. And you do it for survival. You do it to make things easier. And I have peace now because I've decided not to compartmentalize my life. and I'm beginning to have a healthier appetite for conflict. But really, more importantly, I think I'm becoming more willing to bask in what it means to have an integrated life. And it is more so than it's ever been before. And that is a good feeling, delightful feeling.
And what is your favorite sound?
Yo, you might ask my favorite word next, but my favorite sound is rain, like beating on a roof. It's just something that's super calming about rain beating on the roof. Just righteously beautiful.
I've never asked anybody their favorite word, but since you have one, what is it?
It's petrichor. It's petrichor, and it's related to my favorite sound because it's the smell of the air right after it rains.
Okay, so our game is called Rewriting the Classics. Classic is however you define it. Name one book you wished you would have written.
I should have wrote The Great Gatsby. The reason is because it has all of these things that you want it to have in it, though, right? But again, it's sad for no reason. How come he don't get the girl at the end? And also, he has to do so much hiding of who he is because his performance can't be "You Will Accept Me." It's the same thing with The Count of Monte Cristo. So I should have wrote The Great Gatsby because it's a thin book, it's a short book, but it's a tight book. And what better book about somebody who's coming out of prison? Like, imagine me coming out of prison and I don't got to call myself a felon or formerly incarcerated. I could just be like, yo, my cousin was rich and I started Tesla. And people used to ask me, Dwayne, what you would have done if you hadn't gone to prison? I was like, I'd have started Facebook. And then they'd be like, what you mean? And I was like, I was in Fortran. I was in Pascal. I was taking C++. I'm older than dude. How come it couldn't have been me who started Facebook? So you asking me what I would have been if I wouldn't have been in prison, and you already put limits on what I would have been, you know? So I should have wrote this Great Gatsby joint because Gatsby said, who am I going to be after? Who am I going to be with to come up? I would have loved to wrote that joint.
So I'm going to suggest that you write it anyway and do a retelling of Great Gatsby Dwayne style. So let me know when it's coming out and you can come back and we can talk about it. Great.
I bet. All right.
Name a book where you want to change the ending and how would you do it besides Great Gatsby?
I'm going to go with A Lesson Before Dying because this is the first book I read cover to cover, right? And this is where I'm going to change the ending. This taught me something though, right? This is why I want to teach a class one day about law and literature and how literature actually is something that is reflective of the mores of a contemporary culture, but it's often not viewed as a reflection of that. So mind you, right now, juveniles can't get sentenced to life without parole for a non-homicide offense, and they can't get sentenced to die. And even if they get sentenced to life without parole for even a homicide, it's supposed to be some kind of hearing that shows a judge is considering them to be incorrigible. The kid is innocent in A Lesson Before Dying. That's the whole trope of the book, that he's innocent. But the whole goal is for him not to go to the electric chair as a pig. And look, he came out of a culture and out of society where that's all that we could hope for. I would have rewrote the ending. I would have tried to invent the lawyer that got him off. I would have tried to invent the lawyer that would have made it possible for us to imagine that this kid who was innocent, what would it have been like to make this young man imagine that freedom is on the other side? And to have a book that was driving towards freedom. You know, it was an amazing book. It's a book that could only have been written when it was written. We would definitely write a different book now. And that's why I'd imagine a different ending.
What I remember about the ending, is as sad as it was, is when he tells the teacher, tell her I walked. Like that line lives rent free in my mind. And yes, there should have been an alternative to then that he walks to his death proud. But here we are. So then the last question for Rewriting the Classics. Name a book that you think is overrated or overtaught and why?
Lord of the Flies. Let's just stop it. Let's just stop it. Let's just stop Lord of the Flies. I mean, the young boys who actually that happens to, they didn't kill each other. They cooperated. They survived. So like the whole premise of the book is a lie. You know what I mean? Like it's predicated on an untruth. So not only like little Piggy ain't have to die for nothing. And we ain't got to be haunted by Piggy no more. We could believe that there is actually a world where those young men weren't going to become savages, that they weren't going to kill each other, and they were going to do what the actual young men who were their contemporaries did, which was survived until they got rescued. And so I would get rid of that book because I think it was propaganda and it was written for a particular reason. It was trying to convey a particular message. But also it feeds into a narrative about hypermasculinity and the way boys are that is also negative, and it still gets taught.
All right, so my final question for you today. When you are dead and gone and among the ancestors, what would you like someone to write about the legacy of words and work that you've left behind?
What I hope people say about my work is that I've been trying to chronicle what it means to be Black and a man. I've been trying to write these poems about what it meant to come up in prison. And as I've sort of pushed out in the more recent work, is what does it mean to come out of prison every time I say Shaheed in the new book, it's me in prison. So I still haven't let it go, but I've been thinking about what it means to accomplish it and live more fully in myself. So I hope people say that my work took on one of the most challenging tasks of the time period, which is to write about incarceration in a way that lives in a really conflicted space. You know, my mom was raped by a black man. I pulled a pistol out on a white person, carjacked him, and went to prison. And we live in the era of mass incarceration. That whole notion of being underprotected and over policed, it's not just something that James Foreman wrote in his book. It's something that I've lived in my life. And I've tried to navigate my life as an artist with taking those things seriously and taking the constraints that they put on me seriously. So I would love to have somebody point out that I've done that and that I've done it in ways that were meaningful. And I hope they say I was a good dad, man. I love my sons. And I hope people remember that, because sometimes we get remembered for all of the writing and all of the ways that people criticize us publicly or don't, the way they give us acclaim. But yo, I took my children to school. I made paper airplanes. I made breakfasts. You know what I mean? Like I cooked breakfast on school day. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And I hope people remember that.
Big thank you to Reginald Dwayne Betts for being here today on Black and Published. You can follow Dwayne on the socials at Dwayne Betts on Instagram and Threads. And make sure you check out Doggerel, out now from W.W. Norton. You can get a copy of the collection from Mahogany Books and get 10% off your first purchase using code BLACKPUB at checkout. That's BLKPUB. That's our show for the week. If you like this episode and want more Black and Published, head to our Instagram page. It's at Black and Published, and that's BLK and Published. There, I've posted a bonus clip from my interview with Dwayne about one of the first poems he read in prison and what it taught him about the possibility of his future as a writer. Make sure you check it out and let me know what you think in the comments. I'll holler at y'all next week when our guest will be Helena Haywood Henry, author of the novel Last Chance Live.
The way we conduct ourselves culturally and systemically and nationally inside prison walls leaks out into the public square. So if we are a culture of execution behind prison walls, we have become a culture of execution for the rest of us in the public square, right? We go out into our public spaces and we execute each other all the time.
That's next week on Black and Published. I'll talk to you then. Peace.
What's going on, family? This is Derek Young
and Ramonda Young,
owners of both Mahogany Books and the Mahogany Books Podcast Network.
We really want to thank each and every one of you for listening to this episode. And if you enjoyed what you just heard, drop us a review and rate us on whatever platform you download podcasts on.
We truly appreciate each and every one of you for supporting us and making us your go-to for Black books. And we look forward to connecting with you all sometime in the future.
Thank you again, fam. And always remember, Black books matter.